Hello and welcome to the Slow Thinking Podcast with me, Seb Santa Barbara, a travel writer, journalist and mental health advocate.
And me, Izzy Savage, art therapist, ecotherapist and travel enthusiast.
So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about isolation, which for two people who have only had one cup of tea this morning while we're recording this, is probably a pretty deep topic, but we're going to give it our best shot because I think, these are two things that we've both experienced at some point in our lives, and I think many people have experienced them, whether you have been camping up on top of a mountain with 100 people, or kind of finding yourself in a forest in a camper van, or just in your living room with a dog that is continually sleeping and refuses to talk back to you, which is currently my situation right now. So I guess the first thing we want to touch upon, and I'm going to give my definition, Izzy, and then as the trained expert in out of the two of us, you can tell me how close I am. But I would say one of the first things we need to do, because a lot of people can experience isolation and solitude, but we need to sort of think, what is the difference between both of these two terms? So I would say that isolation for me can be, I would say you don't choose isolation. Isolation for me is something that you can feel, like an anxious response. So I think, you could feel isolated in a group of 20 people. You might feel like you're not fitting in. You might feel like you're not feeling it. Your social battery is exhausted. You might feel isolated because you don't feel like you kind of belong. And I know I've spoken to people I'm doing a book plug already. That's fast, isn't it? I've spoken to some people in tent life that have felt isolated while they've been out showing people around different areas. Even though they've been enjoying what they've been doing, they've suddenly just felt this isolation from the group they're in because they might not gel. Whereas solitude for me is something that you can seek out. I feel like solitude sometimes gets a bad rap as a word, because solitude can be sort of taking yourself off to somewhere to choose to be alone from other people, or to choose to be alone with your thoughts, or, for me, solitude has a nicer edge to it because it's something that you can go and find and enjoy, rather, the comfort of the solitude of being in a forest or being on a paddleboard in a lake somewhere. Whereas isolated, so it's kind of, to me, feels like purposely being cut off from other people and not having that connection. So if you want, you can just rephrase all those cool things that I've just said and put like a clever edge on them if you want, which knowing you is probably what you're going to do. But I'm excited to hear what you're going to say. The smile obviously this is an audio podcast, but the smile that she just gave me then was not a happy one.
Harsh words from Seb. I'm understanding the dynamic better now.
Listen, you should have known this was what it was going to be like when you signed up to do this with me.
Oh, I knew very well what I was getting into. Yeah. No, I mean, I really like the way you put that, actually, Seb. I really like the way you described it. And when you were speaking about solitude, what came up for me was a kind of byproduct of solitude, which some people might feel, which is guilt. And I think it can be really hard for us to choose solitude as a form of self-care, but we all need it. And so I think sometimes when people do choose solitude, do choose to be alone, it can come with feelings of guilt that they're not spending time with others, perhaps, or they're not doing X or Y. So that's what initially just came up for me when you were talking about that. But solitude can be really nourishing. And I think that's the main difference. As you said, Seb, solitude is nourishing. Solitude is essential. We need to learn to be with ourselves. We're going to talk a bit more about how we sit with ourselves, how we have experienced that personally. But isolation is often a response to a situation or environment that is not nourishing, that is not supporting us. And that can be really, really hard, really, really hard. So yeah, I've basically just reiterated what you've said. I'm smiling.
You said it in a much more clever and concise way. So that's why you're the expert in this podcast. But no, I think. Do you think, sort of off the bat, do you think solitude can, learning to understand solitude can help overcome isolation?
Potentially. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Learning to be with yourself is really necessary. So learning to appreciate solitude is really necessary. But I think there are times when isolation is that perhaps out of our control. We're feeling isolated because of a situation or external factors. Not always, but sometimes.
I think, personally, I struggled a lot when moving back into sort of normal civilization from living the whole van life thing, because it was a different kind of isolation. I know this is a topic that we'll speak about quite a lot through these podcasts, because this current topic that we're kind of focusing on and rolling through is alternative living, and both me and Izzy have shared experiences about some of the things that we've done, and the ways in which we felt isolated or experienced solitude, and I've found myself in the middle of forests or on the cusps of of rivers and lakes, and felt completely at ease, but then coming back into quote unquote normal society and feeling out of place, that made me feel incredibly isolated. So I have had to learn how to be by myself in a very different form to what I had been living my previous life. And that's very odd, because we grow up in a specific way, doing specific norms, and then change that round and come back to those norms again, and they can feel so alien and so completely out of our control, I guess. But I mean, shared experience wise, you and I have both, we've both done some living and traveling abroad. We've both lived different aspects of life, and both lived in different vehicles or boats or different places. And you're currently living in Spain, and obviously you haven't always lived in Spain. You grew up in England and then moved out to Spain after doing your van life travels. How has that affected your kind of terms of you in terms of isolation and solitude, and finding solitude, or like starting a new life out there, not knowing people? How would you say you have compartmentalized isolation versus solitude in your current life now, from moving out from England to Spain?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I want to kind of pick up on what you were saying there, because I think it's really important. Before I share my experience, some isolation, we're not necessarily talking, when we talk about isolation and solitude, we're not necessarily talking about how many people are present. I mean, maybe with solitude to an extent we are. Perhaps that's an active choice to not be around others. But isolation can happen with or without people. And I think that's a really good point you're making there, moving back to the city and feeling isolated. And I think that's something I noticed when I moved here, where I am now, which is the north of Spain in Asturias. When I first moved abroad, I moved to Barcelona. I was right in the middle of Barcelona. It was just before the pandemic, so I did have a chunk of time to really enjoy Barcelona and get to know the place, get to know some people there. I didn't find it too hard. It did help that there was a lot of English speakers, and I was moving there with a really basic level of Spanish. So it did help that there were a lot of English speakers around, and I didn't feel massively isolated. But interestingly, after that, moving here after the pandemic, this is a much smaller city. It's much less diverse, much less multicultural. It's a really quite kind of traditional city in many sense, for a kind of northern Spanish city. Used to be a fishing town, now it's quite industrial. And I really struggled to connect with people. partly it was the language barrier. There was so many less. How do you say that? There were much fewer people.
There you go.
If that's grammatically correct, much fewer people who spoke anything other than Spanish. And so that was great on the one hand, because it, pushed me to learn more. But it did feel quite isolating. It was quite hard for me to do quite normal day-to-day things, like going to the dentist or taking the dog to the vet, or, kind of interactions where you need more than a basic level of Spanish, perhaps. I was really struggling with kind of like normal day-to-day things. And it was starting to make me feel really isolated. I was starting to get that sense that I felt actually at times in the van of, oh, I'm different here. And I know that I'm coming from a really privileged perspective right now, because I'm a white woman from England, and I've never, growing up, I never really felt a sense of I'm different. There were times when I noticed, okay, I'm highly sensitive, and I'm overstimulated, and I'm struggling in social situations. There were moments of that for me, but I can't compare my experience of feeling different to someone who, say, isn't white here. But I do think I did really struggle with, oh my gosh, I'm different. Oh my gosh, I really need to speak better Spanish. And I was putting so much pressure on myself to learn the language and expecting to feel so much better and so different if once I'd learned more of the language. And actually, the reality of it was that one Facebook message one day with someone from Germany who lives here changed everything for me. And she reached out, we went for a coffee, and after that, suddenly I was opened up to this network of people who are here, who are from all over the place. And I felt so much less alone. And it was really, really interesting, that shift, and it's changed how I feel about the place. So yeah, I don't know if that is similar at all to any of your experiences. You've maybe kind of gone the opposite way around, in a sense. You were really kind of appreciating solitude, as you said, and then coming back into a city and having to navigate what life was supposed to be in a city. It was really, really challenging for you. I don't know if you want to share some more of that.
Yeah, I would say, I've lived on a narrowboat. I've lived in a van in different places. Some static, some moving. I really enjoyed. One prime example I will give. I really enjoyed the solitude of being in the van. And something I'll say time and time again on this podcast is, it's one of those times where your time is completely your own. And I should probably get that and start selling that as merch, really, shouldn't I? But it's like you wake up, you work when you want, and that's not to say you don't do any work. Like, while I a lot of the time while I was in the van, I would get a lot of people saying, "Oh, you're just a dosser, you don't do any work." While I was traveling in the van, I was the head of written content for Van Clan, which was the world's fastest growing van life website. So we worked hard while we're doing it, but the beauty is you can choose those hours, you can choose when you want to work, and it's amazing because you can just do what you want, and there's no one there to kind of tell you what pressures or what constraints to live your life by. So that's how, like, the solitude element of that was really nice. But then, while living on a narrowboat, I was in a community of people in a marina, and I had come from van life to narrowboating, and I didn't know the terms, and I'm aware of how white middle class privilege this sounds, but I didn't know the terms about narrowboating. they kept talking about the cut. And I was like, well, it's a canal. What we're talking about the cut for, and it became very aware to these people very quickly that I didn't really know what I was talking about because I was just getting into it. So I wasn't used, I hadn't actually, the boat was brought to the marina for me. I paid a guy who was really used to doing it because there was a lot of floods at the time. And I thought, like, I don't want my first travel on a narrowboat to be from, one end of the country across to the other while there's flooding on canals and rivers on my own in a thing I've never driven before. So I had some deadlines to be doing for one of the books I was writing, and this guy brought the boat to the marina, and then it was there for quite a long time. And it was there. I was on the boat, and I was just like doing my writing, and I felt quite isolated because I wasn't like the people around me. I wasn't part of like the community that I had been in when I was in a van. And that's such a weird thing to say, that like there's almost like a clique that you join in with when you're with these people. So some of them had camper vans, and I kind of connected with them on that. But I didn't feel like I belonged in this environment, which is insane because like you're living in a boat. That should be enough. You're all in it together. You're all buying your logs and your coal and everything. But it was very much like, you're the newbie here, and that did feel a little bit isolating at times, and it felt odd because this was at a stage in my life where I wanted to come back up north and be with my friends, and through various circumstances that wasn't possible, and I think that might have had like a factor in it as well, that I felt isolated because of that too. So again, you've got the solitude of still kind of like not having to adhere to specific rules set out by companies and people that we sign up to things for because you are living like a more free alternative life. But it was very different. I felt like I sometimes almost didn't belong, even though I was very happy with the boat that I was building and creating. So it really is. I mean, isolation for me, when you begin to talk about it like this, is something that is, for me, in every case, it's kind of a problem that I've created in my own mind. It's something that I have focused on and then kind of drawn inwards from and felt isolated because of that. In actual fact, those people probably didn't ever think this guy doesn't belong here, but you start to believe that maybe I'm not. I've just realised I'm holding a wooden mouse like a Sherlock Holmes pipe while I'm recording this podcast. No one can see this, but now, so keep that in your mind while I'm talking. I feel like they probably weren't thinking any of this stuff, but you just start to think maybe that's something that's in their minds.
I'd like to jump in because I think what you're saying is really important, and I just noted down. I wrote, sometimes creating a life that's yours is isolating. Is that how you felt? You were really in control of your life. You were really building a life that was much more, perhaps felt much more yours and your way of doing stuff. But that can be isolating in itself because you're removing yourself, in a sense, from the norms, in a sense, from society. Yeah,
absolutely. You make this life, you're happy with it, but then I think there's always a little bit of a wish that you were kind of going back and, I don't know, like sometimes when it's the middle of winter and you're emptying a toilet into a specific drainage port, that you use to clean them with, and it's 10 o'clock at night and you think, I bet my mates are just flushing a toilet now. Like sometimes you can feel a little bit like isolated because you're doing something different. The whole reason we do this is because we want to do something different, but then we, as a byproduct, feel isolated because we are doing something different. And it's like a cyclical thing. We put ourselves in these situations because we want to do, but then we without realizing, almost intrusive thinking, kind of think, I'd like to do the opposite, and that's just human nature. You find yourself, you might find yourself in the middle of a wood, really needing to, do your business, and be like, oh, I really wish I had a toilet right now, but you chose to put yourself there. We all choose to put ourselves in this situation because that's what we want to do, and it's human to think like that. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be enjoying what you're doing while you're out on that hike or out on that tent camping trip or living in an off-grid place, because it's just human to naturally think. How many people do you know, Izzy, that are in a house now and be like, oh, I'd love to go out and be in a camper van? And then when we're out in a camper van, it's also nice to be like, oh, I'd love to be back home in front of a fire right now. It's just human nature. So I guess little, we shouldn't put pressure on ourselves for feeling either way with stuff like that, I guess. But what are some of the things that you've felt have helped you when you've been feeling anxious or feeling isolated? One of the things that I would say is, we've talked about isolation quite a lot now, and during the pandemic I know a lot of people, I'm not sure whether people can remember that thing that happened where we couldn't all go outside and we had to stay indoors, but a lot of people had to sit on their own in flats with their own thoughts for the first time maybe in their entire lives, and it was incredibly uncomfortable for them, and that's kind of like when isolation and solitude mix. When we're forced to be on our own, we then feel even more isolated, and that discomfort can be incredibly powerful. Like, you can, and again, you can be in a field and loving every second of being on your own, and suddenly that isolation can kind of, crawl up your body like a thermometer, and just suddenly like burst out the top of your head, and you can just feel incredibly alone all of a sudden. What are your experiences with kind of sitting with discomfort and kind of just, I don't know, just being okay, being yourself?
It's a really good question. Yeah, I was just reflecting for a moment there on the pandemic and that isolation, solitude that we were forced to face, and how confronting that was for so many people, how hard that was for so many. And I think something that really helped me when I was traveling, so before the pandemic, and I was traveling alone, was just being around people, being around the people of the place, tuning into the rhythms, the ways, the cultures, the habits of the people there. And a really simple example is kind of going for a coffee and just being in a busy coffee shop, being around people. And I found that process, that routine that I got into of going for a coffee somewhere new, whenever I landed in a place, was a really nice way to just observe and notice how do people do things here? What is the vibe about, perhaps? And for me as an art therapist, something that I still do now and I find really restorative is drawing or painting the places that I visit. And actually I've started talking about this a little bit more on my Instagram, because I do feel like it's a really great way to feel connected to a place and to fight that sense of isolation or loneliness, even when there are people around.
What happens if your drawings are like stick figures? Can you still think like, I'm just asking for a friend?
That's a good question. For me, it's drawing or painting, and I find that really, really supportive. It helps me to feel really present with the place. But I'm all about you using the creative outlets that suit you, that are meaningful to you. So for you, Seb, you're a writer. I really encourage you to use your writing abilities and your passion for writing therapeutically in this sense, So if you had, rocked up somewhere in your van, it was somewhere you hadn't been before, you were alone, you're starting to feel a bit lonely, I'd invite you to go and sit in, I don't know, the village square or whatever. Or even if you're in the middle of nowhere in a forest, this could also be quite useful. And just
I was going to say Village Square's got some sort of like Harry Potter vibes about it. Like I'm sort of heading down to like Hogsmeade and going to like just do some people.
I love that. Yeah, man. Head down to Hogsmeade, do some people watching, and write about what you see and get creative with it. Get poetic about it. Just really process and be present with the place that you're in, whether there's people there or not. I find this really works. Recently, I went to a really isolated little beach just because I hadn't been there before, and it's supposed to be beautiful, and it was. And I sat and painted it, and I felt really connected to the place. And I think that act in itself can be quite restorative and really remind us that, yeah, okay, we might be alone, and yeah, we might be feeling isolated or lonely, but we're part of something much bigger. We're always welcome in nature, outdoors. We're part of nature. And I think that's a really important thing to kind of remember, that we do belong, and being creative about our connection to the outdoors and to nature can remind us of that. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that, I mean, yeah, sorry, this tends to happen when you like get into sort of like some of the techniques and stuff you do. I find myself focusing in on what you're saying and forget we're recording a podcast. So then I can just see you looking at me and I'm thinking, oh yeah, we're still suddenly I realise we're still rolling, and then I now have to sort of ramble a little bit to try and think about what I'm going to say next. No, I agree with that. I feel like that's a good thing to. You're almost basically saying head somewhere and kind of put yourself in a situation that you might feel. Okay, so for many people, going and sitting on a beach on their own and with a pad and paper to draw that beach might be like going to the cinema on their own. They might feel a bit of a burk when they do it the first time, but you kind of sort of allowing yourself to sort of think, okay, this is going to be all right. This might feel a bit strange the first time I do it, but the more and more I do it, it's going to get a lot easier. It's actually going to help me to, again, going back to what we were talking about before, sitting with that discomfort and just kind of taking everything in. It's like when people sort of feel anxious and they go to different places and they'll say, green tree, brown soil, yellow bird, blue water. They're kind of just focusing on what they can see, just to make them to bring their anxiety down a little bit, and just be in the present moment of where they are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely something that I could benefit from doing. I mean, for one example of, to kind of take it into the, to going back to the speech about the middle of nowhere, I had a conversation with my cousin. So my cousin and myself recently went to America together to do some work for a camper van company. I was writing and testing the camper vans. And I say work, it was more of like an exciting holiday, really. But I was getting a chance to check out this camper van. And Kev was taking the photos of it, and we were testing it out together. I partnered with the company they call 4 Wheel Campers. I partnered with them over in America. And Kev, he's a professional photographer, and he came with me. And we spent 3 weeks in this camper van going up and down the west coast of America, up and down California into San Francisco, LA, Big Sur, all the route. And we had a conversation about being in the middle of nowhere. And for Kev, I mean, currently as we record this podcast, my cousin has been in the Lake District in England on his own, in his van, walking around in the dark with a head torch. He feels so comfortable being on his own. And we were talking about going into like the backcountry, and he would have zero problem going out into the backcountry without a phone or anything, just sort of sleeping by the sides of trails in his bivvy bag, with the concept of, I mean, the idea of him being eaten by a bear would save me from hearing about loft insulation for another Christmas in a row. Like, I'm sick of that story, so I'm kind of tempted to make him go out there and try it. But for me, I wouldn't go out into the backcountry unless I had like a sat phone that I could use to call people, to find out what the weather's going to be like, to know that I've got that lifeline to the outside world, because I'm anxious about that being cut off, of being isolated from society. But Kev relishes that. That solitude, and again, being isolated from everybody else, he likes shutting himself away and knowing that, like, okay, this is kind of like a roundabouts position where I'm kind of going to be. You won't hear from me for 3 days. And I know a lot of people who do solo travel like that and feel comfortable with that. But for me, that is an absolute nightmare of knowing that, okay, if something happens to me, no one knows where I am. I can't contact people to let them know where I am. I can't sort of send, my girlfriend or my mum a message to be like, yeah, I'm fine here, totally good, going to this next place tomorrow, how's the dog? That kind of thing. Like, so for me, that connection is something that I would absolutely need. And I feel like even when, when we're traveling, even when we're on holiday, even when we've saved up and for a holiday in, Mallorca for a week, or we've spent loads of money to go to Dubai, or we are going on like a tent camping holiday in the Schwarzwald or something like that. We've now got this urge to kind of look at technology continually. We're not happy just sitting with ourselves, like how many times, and I think we're both guilty of this, we'll go somewhere and you will have a scroll through Instagram just because it's that instant communication, you can find out what everybody's doing. It's that instant connection with human beings. And even though we're in this amazing place, we're taking pictures to post on Instagram, we're texting to see, can your mum remember that flower that grew in the garden that you've just spotted in this field that you've walked past? We don't really cut off anymore and just spend time by ourselves. And I think that's kind of like because of the technological age that we live in, and you've constantly got this thing on you. I mean, I know, like, maybe in the 70s, I know people that I speak to now who are obviously older than me, who have been traveling, when they were younger, or when they had children that were traveling, and they would send a letter to where they thought they were going to be, but by the time the letter got there, they'd moved on to somewhere else, so they might not hear from them for sort of 3 to 4 months unless they kind of found a payphone. And I mean, a guy I worked with at the music venue in York that I worked at before becoming a writer, his mum called Interpol because she hadn't heard from him for a whole year, and he realised around Christmas that he hadn't rung his mum, and he rang her, and she was beside herself because she thought he died because she hadn't spoken to her, But now we have this connection, we have this thing in our pocket where we can just say anywhere, wherever we are, hey, Find My Friends is turned on, watch me until the signal goes out, and then find it when I come back on. So, I feel like, A, I've kind of spoken so much I can't remember what topic I'm on, but also B, we should probably switch off more. What do you think, Izzy?
Yeah, no, that made sense to me. I don't know if it's just because I know you so well, but that all seemed to flow fine. I mean, I think we should switch off more. I do, but I as you were talking, I was thinking about knowing your limits. I was thinking about your cousin, and I was thinking about. Like, your cousin knows his limits. Your cousin knows his abilities, his skills, and feels comfortable enough doing that. And it's okay that we don't all have those skills and abilities. We can't all do that. But it's important perhaps to find, I think, to find that kind of balance between knowing your limits, knowing your skills, knowing what you can and can't do. I'm talking about, like, physically, like, can I map read? Could I get myself out of this place if I didn't have my phone? And also being able to push yourself a little bit, because I think part of what we're talking about with this podcast is, we're choosing to do things slightly differently from the norm, or very differently from the norm at times. And that, as we always talk about, can be uncomfortable, it can be challenging, but it's not a reason not to do it. And I think it's okay to slowly push, in the therapy world, we call it like our window of tolerance, to slowly push what we can tolerate and expand that window of tolerance, learn that, okay, I'm doing something that feels a little bit risky, but I've got these skills, so I trust myself to cope with it, and then proving to yourself, okay, yeah, I did that, I can do that. And in that way, your window of tolerance grows. It's kind of helping you to trust yourself, helping you to have new experiences, to become more resilient. And I think when it comes to technology, I was speaking to a friend the other day. She was saying, I couldn't navigate the city without my phone. I couldn't map read. I'd have no idea what to do. And I was thinking, wow, that's actually a real problem, I think, for so many of us. If our phone switches off, we can't find our way back to the car or whatever. That's crazy how reliant we are just for sort of navigating around the place, let alone, as you were saying, connecting with people, making, having that reassurance that people are okay, perhaps feeling connected with people who we're not, who we're far away from. Yeah, go. Seb's put his finger in the air.
It's only going to... I think I'm grabbing the mouse again so I can do my Sherlock Holmes moment. But I feel like knowing your limits is exactly what I was going to say while you were sort of going through that. But mainly, like, the way I would summarize it is we need to be more confident in ourselves, don't we? That's the whole thing. I feel like, and this is the eureka moment that I had while you were talking. But I feel like confidence is what separates isolation from solitude in some senses. Mm-hmm. So if you're confident, you can get yourself out of the backcountry, back to the road. You don't feel like you're isolated because you know you can comfortably get back to civilization. Yes, things can go wrong, and you can't account for everything. But if you're confident in your map reading abilities, for example, let's stick on this theme. If you're confident with your map reading abilities, that you know where to find fresh water, that you know you've got enough food to get you back there, you know generally the route, you know that people are aware of where you are, perhaps you're going to feel less isolated by the fact that you are in the middle of nowhere. And I say, perhaps, like, if you're confident with your own thoughts and you're you're happy with your own mind and you're happy with your own self and your being, you can feel much less isolated wherever you are. And I guess maybe that's like me as an anxious person speaking about this, like, there have been times where I've not had confidence in, can I get back to this place? There have been times where I've thought, oh, that last train's coming and I don't have a signal on my phone. I'm not confident that I could do this and do that and X, Y, Z to get back to where I'm going. And I do sort of think as well that you are right. We are becoming way more reliable. I mean, it's going to get worse as AI comes out. I mean, I hate this. I hate AI, Izzy, and everyone else in the world is going to know it soon as well. But the more we rely on things telling us where to go and how to do stuff, we're just going to lose the skills that, some of the people that I've spoken to while tent camping and writing books on camping are trying to keep alive. Like the whole idea of bushcraft is kind of like you could argue that fewer and fewer people are knowing about how to survive in the wild. And while we're at home with Google telling us what the weather is and and stuff like that, we lose the ability to sort of like track water, to set. I mean, how many people do you know that can start a fire? How many people do you know they've got a ferro rod somewhere around that they can start a fire with? Or how many people know which mushrooms you can eat, which ones you can't, and which, it's because I guess we just don't need to know it in our modern lives. But there are times when we might need to know this stuff. And what's everyone going to do? Try to Google it.
Yeah, I think this is really important. And this is something I'm really, really passionate about. So I'm going to try and be concise about. But a big part of what I do as an art therapist and a recently qualified ecotherapist is helping us human beings to remember that we are nature, as I was saying before, to feel like we belong outdoors, because there are books and books and research and papers and all sorts of information out there that prove that the more isolated we become from the outdoors, the non-human world, the less the less mentally well and often physically well we become. There's so much research, and I'm probably saying something really obvious, and a lot of our listeners are like, well, duh. But it's true. What you're saying is that the more we become reliant, the less we have these skills, and also the less we feel that we belong in the first place outdoors. So we spend more time indoors. If we don't have the confidence and the self-trust, going back to that, in ourselves, to even take ourselves for a hike perhaps, or a walk, then we're potentially becoming really isolated from the natural world, from the outdoors, and it can be really, really detrimental. And yeah, it's something I'd like to talk more about, but I'm not going to go on at this point about that.
Well, two things. Completely agree with you all on all that. Number one, we need to get out more. And two, detrimental would make a great metal band name. So let's think about that for if we do a side project. Technically, that would be fantastic. I was just thinking then, I could really see us in a band called Detrimental.
I actually really like that, yeah.
We could play like ecotherapy gatherings and stuff like that, but just sing about sing about nature, but in a metal way. That'd be sick, wouldn't it?
I love that. That is such a niche group that we would attract, like nature lovers and metal lovers coming together. But I think it could work. I think there's a lot of them out there. In fact, if you're listening to this and you fit into that little niche group of, and maybe it's not that little, maybe I'm being quite naive, maybe actually lots of metal lovers are into the outdoors. But yeah, let us know, contact us, tell us that you're one of those people. I
mean, I have seen you outside in an Envisions t-shirt quite a lot, and nothing says metal like being out in the outdoors in black shorts and Factor 50, so I feel like this could be a big thing. Maybe we need to sack the podcast off now and just get a band practice going.
It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. Yeah, detrimental.
So yeah, I'm digging that. If anyone wants to see, I mean, maybe this is an idea for merch already, is that we could just get Detrimental with a lot of like a raccoon playing in some leaves or something. She's writing it down.
Yeah, I am.
We've got merch already. We've got 3 or 4 episodes of this podcast. I don't know even how many listeners we've got, but we've already started thinking about merch for tote bags and t-shirts. So if you want to get one of those, let us know. Yeah. And I'm sure sometime between now and the end of 2024, we'll probably get those out to you.
At least being realistic, I like that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, listen, the one thing about this podcast is that we've got to be realistic, haven't we? Otherwise,
yeah,
that's the whole aim, isn't it?
Oh, totally. I mean, I feel like we've gone off on a little tangent, but I think it's all relevant, isn't it? Ultimately, as you were saying before, self-trust might be, or self-acceptance even, might be the key to, or the difference between solitude and isolation. How do we nourish our sense of self-trust? How do we nourish our sense of self-acceptance and know that, okay, despite me living my life differently to a lot of people, I'm okay. This is what I need. This is right for me. I just wanted to kind of sum up a little bit and come back full circle.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Like you always look to me to sum these things up at the end, and I'm proud of you. That's all I can say. I feel like you've come come full circle, just like this podcast. Amazing. And I know that everyone's going to roll their eyes at that.
I feel very proud of myself. Thanks, Seb.
Yeah, you should. I think you could probably do this on your own now, so I'll just log off.
No.
She's shaking her head.
It'd be very boring if it was just me speaking into...
Don't say that. I agree with you, but don't say that out loud. It's that's bad for that. That's going to help. That's going to make you feel more isolated after what you just said. So you can't do that. Yeah.
Good point.
No, I think you're correct. I think that we may have just solved the problem of isolation. and all for free. I mean, look at that. What more could you want? I feel like we all experience isolation at times, and I feel like 99% of those times, it's probably something that we've put ourselves into. You know, like you said, the difference between me and Kev being, you know, having a family member who, you know, wants to go out into the back country and one who wants to stay by the road near a phone box is a prime example of how we make ourselves feel isolated, and we have it in our power to curb feelings of isolation while being in a place of solitude. And a lot of that, as Izzy has said then, is being okay. You know, for some of, and these are all topics. I mean, the next topic we're going to talk about is going to be the fear of the unknown, and that's a lot of that ties nicely into this. Which basically we've set these podcasts in a way that make you listen to all of them, and then gives a great Spotify review rating at the end. So it's not a coincidence. We've done this purposely. But you know, the idea of, as soon as you're alone and maybe listening to those intrusive thoughts that you've not understood before, or put yourself in a situation that you don't understand, and then that can instantly make you feel isolated. But we have the ability to take ourselves out of that just by being present and just saying, you know what, this is all right. Being kind to yourself is something that I've had to learn a lot of over the past couple of years. Changing that narrative in your own mind to being, you know, you're doing great, this is fine, you can do this. And also focusing on what Izzy said about knowing your limits. You know, I can't climb Mount Everest right now, so I'm not going to go out and do it without training. I'm not going to put myself in a situation knowingly that's going to make me feel like I can't do that. If I want to learn to climb Mount Everest, which for friends and family listening, I don't, so it's fine. But if I want to do that, I'm going to do it slowly until the point that I know that, okay, I know exactly what to do if that oxygen goes out, or if that happens, I know how to do this and where, and I'm comfortable with doing that. And yes, there are still problems that can arise, and you can't get every eventuality covered, but you can cover all the big ones and most of them, and prepare yourself for the stuff that might happen along the way. And one of the things that I think I want to zoom back on and just sort of like focus on is, how do we combat loneliness? Now, this is far too big a topic to cover like just in a small section, so I'm not expecting that. This is the part of the podcast where I ask Izzy, as a trained therapist, an art therapist, an ecotherapist, is someone who I look to for advice. I like to get something from her about how we can tackle some of the things that we've talked about in this podcast. And I think loneliness is kind of one of the things we've honed in on, or that can be a cause of feeling isolated. So I want to ask Izzy, as my friend, and, you know, probably, let's face it, I'm getting free therapy out of these podcasts, so like this is fantastic for me. What's something that we can do to combat loneliness, be it in the moment or something that we can use to work towards feeling less lonely in the future? You know, what is something that you can tell the listeners and me that I can go away and do and post on social media after this podcast? You know, what's like an exercise that you might think of that we can all implement and that I can be held accountable for?
Yeah, we've decided that Seb's going to do these exercises and then post a picture or something about it on our Instagram to make him accountable. So I'm excited to see that.
I mean, someone's got to hold me accountable for something in this world, so it might as well be you, Izzy.
It's our Instagram. It's our followers. Yeah, it's really nice, and it's nice that you've brought in loneliness, actually, because it's so relevant and it's a huge topic. We've barely scratched the surface, I think, of isolation and loneliness, and we're not going to go into all the different ways or reasons for it. But yeah, something that I think would be worth trying, and I'd really like to know how it feels for you. And it's, again, as you were describing earlier, Seb, going out with a notebook, sitting, I don't know, on a beach or in the town square and drawing or writing or whatever it is, can feel really weird for people. This might be something that feels a bit like that to begin with, but I really encourage you to try it, and try it more than once if it does feel weird, and just to notice how you feel before and after doing this. So what it is it's called bilateral drawing, which is kind of just a fancy word for drawing with both hands, because we're grabbing. What I really like to use is like big chunky crayons, coloured crayons. So you really want something like that. It can be like kids' crayons, even just 2 pencils. You could use 2 pens, but I quite like these crayons because I like the way they feel when I scribble. And a notebook or a piece of paper or a piece of scrap paper, an old newspaper. You don't have to go out and buy materials for this. And you're just going to scribble with both hands at the same time. And it sounds really pointless and really weird. I totally get that. But there's a lot of benefits to connecting with our bodies, with our hands, with the materials, and bringing ourselves into the present and allowing ourselves to draw completely aimlessly. I'm waving these like 2 crayons around because it's helping me to talk about this. And
if you could see what I can see, it looks, what I'm looking at looks like the beginnings of a mental breakdown, but I feel like the method to the madness is fantastic. So I'm really enjoying this.
Is it a mental breakdown, or is it me casting a spell? It looks a little bit like Wingardium Leviosa to me.
Well, I don't know what's happened, but I have forgotten everything that's happened over the past 4 weeks. Ooh. So perhaps it's that as well, yeah.
No, but really, what I really want to invite you to do is just give this a go. And I'm doing it right now as we speak, and it might mess up the sound. I'm sorry, Seb. Seb has to deal with that. But the idea of just spending time, and I want you to give yourself time to do this. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Your hands don't have to be doing the same thing at the same time. One can be scribbling, one can be doing dots, whatever. But I want you to give yourself a little pocket of time to just sit and do this and allow yourself to come into the present. Like I said, connect with the materials, connect with your body as you do it. And it's a really grounding practice. And groundedness is really important for that self-trust and that self-acceptance that we were talking about earlier. Feeling grounded, bringing our nervous system down, connecting with ourselves and allowing ourselves a moment to kind of slow down and make purely for the sake of making. It's a really, really nourishing tool to add to your like mental health tool belt. And a client of mine said, and I've asked her if I can quote this. I've got her permission. She said yes. She shared with me this phrase in a session recently, which was, breathe in, I feel, breathe out, I move. And I want to just ask you, I'm not going to say any more about that, but I want to ask you, as you bilateral draw, Seb, and listeners, see if you can bring that into your, into the act of scribbling and drawing. Breathe in, I feel, breathe out, I move. Just see if you can say that to yourself as you breathe, as you draw. And just notice how you felt before, notice how you felt after. If there's no change or if things got worse, also let us know. If things got better, then great. But yeah, I'm going to leave it at that.
And what are you expecting to come out of this? I mean, I'm guessing we don't have to sort of look down and see there's a new Picasso being born or anything. It's just whatever comes out of your brain. I mean, you've seen my drawing. My drawing is, I think I'm the only person that makes a dog, look like it could be some sort of deformed cloud. So this is just whatever comes out of your brain, whatever happens. We're just not expecting miracles. We're just expecting something. And what is that supposed to, does it mean anything? Is it just there to just like an expression?
That's a really great point. And actually, I sometimes forget about this because I'm so used to just making without an end goal. But I forget that so many of us aren't used to that. So thank you for bringing that. Yeah, we're not aiming to make anything. The outcome. That's why I said you can grab an old newspaper for this. This is all about the process and the feeling of bilateral drawing, and actually that movement. We're moving that feeling. So if we were feeling loneliness, for example, moving the feeling of loneliness through ourselves by doing this and allowing ourselves to spend a little bit of time with it. The outcome, the scribble, it's just going to be a scribble that you burn, throw away, turn into, I don't know, something else. There's no goal for an end product here, and that's really, really key. It's also a really good exercise in just making for the sake of making because it feels good. It's not something we're really used to.
You're like a sort of wise, I was going to say wise old owl then, but I realised that you're not old, but then I said it anyway on a podcast that's going to be here forever. You're like a wise, appropriate aged owl.
Appropriately aged, because old isn't appropriate.
No, because you're not old,
right, yeah.
and I'm scared of you. I'm scared of you incredibly. So, you just showed me you were waving 2 crayon wands at me, so... What if I call you an old owl? Then I might not, I might be even more bald than I am already tomorrow morning or something.
Oh, I do like this comparison with like an owl and perhaps a witch or a wizard. I do see myself kind of morphing into one or both of those at some point. Yeah.
When you say it out loud like that, it does sound like I am not your friend, but I really am. I'm just a massive nerd that. Can currently see a lot of owls in the room that I'm in, so I'm recording this from my mum's living room, and she likes an owl. So,
okay, thanks for clarifying.
So it's coming from a place of endearment, and the old thing should just be forgotten. Okay, we'll just put that underneath the rug.
It's fine. I'm not worried about aging. It's okay.
Okay, well, I think that is a good point to call it quits for today. I hope you've had a really nice time listening to our breakdown of isolation and solitude. And yeah, definitely keep us in the loop with how you've been doing with your bilateral drawing. And I will keep you in touch with mine. And as always, at the end of this podcast, you can... check out our socials and how to contact us, and we will be back in touch. But yeah, for now, thanks very much, guys, for listening. Thank you, Izzy, for putting up with me for yet another podcast, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Thanks, Seb. See you next time. Bye, guys.
Thanks very much for joining us on this episode of the Slow Thinking Podcast. Don't forget, you can follow us on Instagram at Slow Thinking Podcast.
And if you give any of our exercises a try, do share them with us by tagging us on there. And if you'd like to send us an email, you can at slowthinkingpod@gmail.com. See you next time.